What should we do when we cross into the era of a tyrant? Of course, tell him to pull it down, your empire is long gone. Keywords of the novel. My days accompanied by a tyrant with no pop-ups, my days accompanied by a tyrant complete collection download, latest chapter reading of my days accompanied by a tyrant. What are you going to do to my daughter in chapter 1? You are listening at novelfull.audio. What are you going to do to my daughter in chapter 1? Night. Yang Feng drifted aimlessly in the air. He is a paratrooper who performs combat missions, jumps out of the cabin with his companions, and then suddenly turns day into night directly changing. Just like the screen switching, it suddenly went from sunny to pitch black, and the umbrella flowers in the sky disappeared with the screen switching. In the night sky that was within reach of vision, he was left alone and landed, and all electronic signals on his body disappeared. The positioning system had no signal, the communication system had no signal, and even the roar of the airplane engine overhead disappeared. And it's cloudy, not a single star can be seen above my head. But there are scattered lights under my feet. It seems that there is still a large river reflecting faint waves, and as for the rest, it is completely dark and heavy. And the scattered lights were clearly not electric lights. More like firelight. He hung under the parachute and continued to drift down in confusion. Quickly, countless faint outlines appeared among the scattered lights, like a group of hidden dark monsters waiting to be fed, and he was the food left behind by fate, with fear and unease. As he approached the ground, he could vaguely see that it was a huge city, and towering building outlines emerged one after another, as if a group of towering giants were watching. And then he landed. He skillfully and quickly unhooked his parachute, picked up his rifle, and entered the combat mode at the fastest speed, while the cat crouched down and crawled out of the parachute. A pale and miserable face suddenly appeared. He instinctively took a breath, but then saw clearly that it was just a little girl. Shut up. He quickly covered the frightened little girl's mouth and whispered in a low voice. Because he was crouching, the two of them were almost face to face. The latter was actually a junior high school student, dressed in ancient costumes and not even using a flashlight for some reason. He stood in the darkness, looking at him with a clearly stunning gaze from less than half a meter away, as if looking at a monster. Yang Feng covered her mouth and carefully observed the surroundings, realizing that it was actually a classical garden with a rockery. The little girl was right next to the rockery, and there was a pond behind it, surrounded by flowers and plants. He took a deep breath. Be good, I'll give you candy to eat. He changed into a smile and whispered softly. Then he pushed the little girl onto the rockery, pressed her mouth, then took out a piece of chocolate, tore open the packaging with his teeth, pushed forward, and let go of his hand. Then, accompanied by a short scream from the little girl, it was stuffed into her mouth. Don't shout, speak up if you have something to say. Yang Feng said sincerely. The little girl, whose cheeks were pinched by him, looked at him with frightened eyes, sobbing in her mouth. Chocolate flowed from the corner of her mouth, and in the dim light of her watch, she seemed like a little white rabbit caught by a big gray wolf. After thinking for a moment, Yang Feng pulled out his knife and shook it in front of her. She quickly nodded, obviously better than chocolate. Yang Feng slowly let go of his hand. The little girl quickly spat out the chocolate in her mouth. Are you going to poison me? She said tearfully. Yang Feng was shocked. I admit that this thing is not very delicious, but your description is still too much. He said dissatisfied as he understood her meaning. Then he watched the little girl spit out chocolate from her mouth, holding a small handkerchief and habitually wiping her mouth, and he said it's not poison, I've already vomited blood. She cried and said. Then she looked at the dark thing on the handkerchief, imagining the scene of herself spitting blood from her mouth, and couldn't help but feel sad from the bottom of her heart. She opened her mouth and was about to cry. Yang Feng quickly pushed her onto the rockery and pressed her shut. Don't be like this, haven't you tasted that it's really a delicacy? He looked at her silently. He also knows it's a bit unfair to say this. It's a bit excessive to call 90% of dark chocolate a delicacy. The latter gazed at the night sky with infinite attachment, as if waiting for death to come. Yang Feng reluctantly took out another piece and stuffed it into her mouth. Her gaze turned to surprise, and Yang Feng opened his mouth to signal that he had swallowed it. Then he took out another piece and stuffed it into his mouth. Seeing that she had turned confused, he finally released his hand. Seeing that she had no abnormal reaction, Yang Feng began to observe the surroundings. Unfortunately, he couldn't see anything. This was just a garden, with some towering buildings in the distance and some lights there. Apart from that, he couldn't see anything. He looked at the little girl helplessly. "So, where is this?" he asked with a smile on his face. "Are you a fairy? I saw you carrying a big umbrella falling from the sky." The little girl asked innocently after restoring the designated town. Yang Feng looked at her. "Yes, I am a fairy descending from the sky," he said with a serious expression, as if switching states with an ant. "Can you take me to the sky?" The little girl remained innocent, looking at him with an obviously hopeful gaze. "Of course, but first you need to tell me where this is and how to leave." "I'll tell you. Will you take me to the sky?" "I am a fairy and won't deceive anyone. As long as you tell me, it's best to take me away from here, then I can take you to the sky. There are always good things on that day, and you can have whatever you want. We can go to the amusement park, eat ice cream, and I can also teach you how to play games," Yang Feng said in a seductive tone. "This is the Imperial Palace." The little girl answered readily. "What about the palace?" Yang Feng pretended to be calm and said. "Airborne to the Imperial Palace, the harem. If this Tama is caught or not killed, he will be castrated." "And who is the emperor?" he asked. "The emperor is my father," the little girl said with an obvious look of fear. It can be seen that she is very afraid of her father. "What is your father's name?" Yang Feng asked. "This is a princess." Entering the harem at night and enticing the princess, this should not only be killing, but also killing the 9 clans. Fortunately, he doesn't have the 9 clans to kill. This princess is obviously too foolish, so she should be able to coax her. However, we still need to see what kind of emperor he is, what kind of emperor has to execute his 9 clans. "My dad is the emperor, aren't you a fairy? Why don't you even know this?" the silly white princess said in confusion. "I'm asking you, not you're asking me. Do you still want to go to heaven? Take me out quickly," Yang Feng said with a stern expression. "But you're a fairy, aren't you flying?" the little princess said naively. "Flying also needs to be done first. When I do it, there will be lightning and thunder, clouds and mist, and dazzling lights. This place is full of houses, which can easily startle others. We need to find a spacious and uninhabited place." Yang Feng put on a serious expression like those scammers and said seriously. "Oh." The little princess agreed, turned back eagerly, and Yang Feng followed behind with his backpack on his back. Soon, after turning around a flower tree, a water pavilion appeared. The little princess signaled for him to remain silent, leading him quietly through the moon gate and out of the garden. Outside were large houses, although there were lamp pillars, they were not lit, so it was pitch black. They quickly arrived at a door. Yang Feng immediately stepped forward to open the door bolt, took out the lubricating oil for wiping the gun, and dripped some on the door shaft before quietly opening the door. The little princess looked suspicious. "It's still pitch black outside, can't you light more lamps in your palace?" Yang Feng said. "Dad won't allow it, saying that all the lamp oil is contributed by the people and we should be frugal," the little princess said. However, she was also very afraid, and then she shrank to Yang Feng's side, like only following the 3 flowers of rhubarb. The 2 of them walked forward in a pitch-black alley. Yang Feng simply put on his night vision device, and the little princess held his clothes to guide him, trembling from time to time. "What are you shaking for?" Yang Feng said. "Dad will scold." The little princess, with her good child, suddenly rebelled and trembled with excitement. "Naughty." Yang Feng smiled and said. They kept walking like this, and finally arrived at another door. Passing through this gate leads to the inner garden, which is the northernmost part of the palace. Further north is the Hongwu gate, and at night, this place is empty and deserted. The little princess said. But the door was closed, and Yang Feng pushed it a bit but didn't open it. It was obvious that the door had already been bolted inside. He looked at the little princess, and the little princess looked at him. "You're a fairy, don't you know how to use magic?" she asked. "This. Did you lie to me?" "Nonsense, you saw me coming down from the sky. So you're using magic," the little princess said with a pure expression on her face. She is clearly not hopelessly foolish. "What do you, a mortal, understand about the matter of immortality? I have something else to do tonight, so go back and wait. I'll come pick you up tomorrow night," Yang Feng said. This wall can't stop him. As a paratrooper, he needs to bring enough equipment. The climbing hooks and ropes are all in his backpack, making it easy to climb inside. However, he definitely can't bring the little princess anymore. According to her, this is the northernmost point, and there is probably only a city wall left. She has no practical value anymore. "You're lying to me, you scammer." The little princess looked at Yang Feng, who had already found the rope, wiped her tears and cried. "Have we already used ropes? Who immortal can still climb walls with ropes?" Yang Feng is not interested in taking care of her anymore. He picked up his backpack again, grabbed the climbing hook, and prepared to climb the wall. "Someone, there's a demon here. Hurry up and catch the demon," the little princess behind suddenly shouted. Then she turned around and ran. Yang Feng was so angry that he turned around and grabbed her belt, then pulled her back. Her body, which weighed dozens of pounds, was slightly heavier than a backpack, and he pulled it back directly. "Shut up, don't fool around, I'll compensate you with something," he picked her up and said. However, at this moment, a strange noise came from behind the door. Yang Feng turned around in shock, holding the little princess, and then saw the two doors slowly open, revealing a bright light inside. Under the reflection of the two lanterns, there were dozens of beardless men, and among them was an old man in a red robe, looking at him with a chill on his back. "What do you want to do to my daughter?" he said slowly. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Zhu Yuanzhang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Zhu Yuanzhang. Yang Feng held the little princess in one hand and looked awkwardly at her father. Escort. A strong man suddenly let out a loud roar. Then he bravely stood in front of the emperor. Meanwhile, other strong men swarmed forward. Without hesitation, Yang Feng let go. Amidst the sound of the poor little princess patting the ground, he quickly pulled out his pistol, opened the barrel, and aimed it directly at the front of the strong man's leg, pulling the trigger. With the sound of gunfire, the strong man, who was already 5 meters away, knelt down instantly. The ones behind didn't react and continued to move forward. Yang Feng kept pulling the trigger, and 4 strong men knelt down in a very short time. The ones behind couldn't dodge and collided with them. "The demon has firearms, protect Wan Suiyi first," the strong man guarding the emperor shouted. The remaining strong men contracted at the fastest speed, quickly blocking the emperor layer by layer behind them. However, bang! A bullet hit the blue brick next to the emperor. There was silence amidst the splashing debris, but the emperor remained motionless, only frowning and continuing to look at Yang Feng. Yang Feng's pistol is still pointing at him. The two of them gazed at each other like a pair of dead glass, and the strong men were so frightened that they remained motionless. "You scammer!" Then, in a tense atmosphere, the delicate voice of the little princess rang out. She, who was thrown to the ground by Yang Feng, was like a rusty robot, slowly propping up one by one, with a face full of sadness and anger, and then watching her father instantly wake up, "Dad." She was so scared that she knelt down again. "You're a good firearm, where did you get it?" the emperor said. "Self-made." Yang Feng said. "Dad, he came down from the sky. I saw him carrying a big umbrella and it fell from the sky. His umbrella was still in the garden. He said he was a fairy and lied to me that he wanted to take me to the sky." The little princess did not hesitate to confess Yang Feng's crime. "What is that?" The emperor pointed to the rifle on Yang Feng's chest. "This is a long gun, this is a short gun, one hits far and the other hits close." Yang Feng said. "When I was charging into battle, I used to fight with both long and short spears. It has been more than 20 years since the gods descended to earth, but it was disrespectful of me. It was a happy occasion for the gods to descend to the palace. If my daughter had a connection with the gods, it would be a good thing for her to follow them. I don't know how to call the gods, so I can also order the people of that world to worship them." The emperor smiled and said. "Dad, he's a scammer, he doesn't know magic." The little princess said anxiously. "Shut up!" the emperor shouted. Then he and Yang Feng looked at each other, he. Both of them smiled at the same time. "Your Majesty, I was just passing by in the sky when I suddenly saw this place with a myriad of rays and auspicious colors. I knew it was the residence of the Holy Lord, and I also saw that the princess had a unique skeleton, which was a good seedling for cultivating immortality. I wanted to take her to the Immortal Mountain for cultivation. If I could achieve good results, I could also protect your Majesty's rivers and mountains in the future. Now that my goal has been achieved, it is better not to delay. Let me take the princess back to the Immortal Mountain as soon as possible." Yang Feng said. "Since the immortals have arrived, there is no right to leave. They have to stay as guests for a few days." The emperor said. "There is a difference between immortals and mortals, so it's not necessary anymore. What you want? It's really unnecessary." Yang Feng said. "Since that's the case, then I'll send you the fairy as a gift." The emperor said. However, Yang Feng did not put down the gun in his hand, "Please." The emperor made a gesture of invitation. "Your Majesty, why don't you let them retreat first?" Yang Feng said. The emperor was straightforward. With a wave of his hand, the strong men quickly retreated, like a group of obedient machines. These should be eunuchs, all without beards and weapons. They are definitely not allowed to carry weapons in the palace, especially in this forbidden area of the harem, which is actually the weakest in terms of military strength. The surrounding imperial city and front hall are the ones guarded by the guards and imperial guards. After all, even if there is an external attack, they can only be attacked in sequence. Those like Yang Feng who directly parachuted into the palace are not within their consideration. Yang Feng held a pistol and walked past the eunuchs, straight to the emperor. "Your Majesty, this was just an accident, I just want to leave," he whispered. "You are a fairy," the emperor said calmly. "Yes, I am a fairy," Yang Feng said. "This guy is very cunning, and he will definitely encounter more people when he goes out of the palace, especially those guards outside. If the emperor is being kidnapped, not only will his reputation be bad, but it will also make some people have other thoughts in his heart. But if Yang Feng is an immortal, it's different. The Holy Lord Ming Jun is in court, and the immortal will parachute into the palace. It's also a good thing that rumors spread. In this case, he will actually bite Yang Feng as an immortal. This is also a good thing for Yang Feng. This way, there is hope that both sides will not tear their faces apart." He didn't expect a rifle with 7 magazines and a few hand grenades to really kill out of the palace. "You forgot your disciple," the emperor said. After speaking, he looked at his daughter. Come here, since the immortal is destined for you, then follow and serve the immortal. He said. The little princess was dumbfounded. Then her father glared, and she had to shudder forward. Your Majesty's children seem quite numerous. Yang Feng said. My children are over 40. The emperor said. After he finished speaking, he turned around and walked forward. Yang Feng followed closely with a pistol, and the poor little princess followed with a sorrowful expression on her face. There were eunuchs on both sides and in front and behind, and the number was increasing. The emperor remained calm and indifferent to the muzzle of the gun behind him. He even ordered the palace maids and eunuchs he encountered along the way to bow to Yang Feng, and the latter, who knew nothing, knelt down one by one. They continued forward, passing through several grand palaces. These palaces are obviously not the modern museum, but there are also some similarities. They eventually walked into a large palace, and then the emperor walked straight to the middle throne and sat down, but the eunuch stopped outside the door. With a wave of his hand, the emperor quietly closed the door. Your Majesty. Yang Feng looked at him with questioning eyes. You dare to pretend to be a fairy with a firearm, but you have a lot of courage. The emperor sneered. Yang Feng looked around and only his female disciple was there. Your Majesty, I am truly a fairy. He said. If there really are immortals, then I am the destined emperor. You are just a little fairy. How dare you be reckless in front of me? If there are no immortals, you are just a thief infiltrating the palace. Kill you. Executing your 9 tribes is just a decree. Even if you hold a firearm, you dare to pretend to be an immortal in front of me. I have killed many people like you who pretend to be gods and ghosts. It's just that the firearm in your hand is a good thing that can be fired continuously without ignition. I want to use it to imitate and manufacture it for military use. Bring your short gun. Don't do anything foolish. I don't want to kill you yet. It doesn't matter if you pretend to be a fairy. Prosperity and wealth are inseparable from you, but if you do something foolish, there's nothing left, the emperor said. Yang Feng felt melancholic for a moment. This guy is very cunning. He eventually took out the pistol and handed it to the little princess next to him, who took small steps, lowered his head, and held the pistol to offer to her father. Are you not afraid that I will cast a blow at you? Her father said to Yang Feng. Since you are the emperor, of course I must comply with the order. Yang Feng said. The emperor took a pistol, lifted it up like he did before, and then pointed it at him. Yang Feng looked calmly at with his gun holding posture. A bullet can hit the roof with just one shot, so there's no need to worry. You are considered sensible. The emperor withdrew his pistol and said. He is also very sensible, as long as he has a short gun, not a long one. He was playing with this pistol and soon discovered something good, then withdrew the magazine. I'll just say, since it's a firearm, there must be some medicine. He said proudly. Then he looked at Yang Feng. Bring me a few more of them, and from now on, the long spear belongs to you and the short spear belongs to me. He said. Yang Feng silently untied the magazine bag and handed it to his female disciple, who then silently delivered it to her father. After receiving it, her father took out the only spare magazine. Save it a bit, that's all for now. Even the remaining shots in the gun can still fire 14 rounds. Yang Feng said sincerely. Is that all? The emperor said in dissatisfaction. Your Majesty, this is just for self-defense. We have dealt with the enemy in front of us, but we will not let the enemy come to us in battle. This long spear is the key to war, and a short spear can hit accurately in just a few dozen steps. If you want to kill anyone from 100 steps away, you can kill them. Your Majesty, I was really just an accident, and I didn't expect to suddenly fall into your palace. We are entangled with each other, causing everyone a lot of trouble. Why not let each other go? I am free to leave the palace, and you are still your emperor. Yang Fengqing said earnestly. Is it the land of kings in the world? This world belongs to me. Where do you want to go? The emperor jokingly said. This. Yang Feng was also lost. Indeed, even if you leave the palace, where can you go? The key is, what dynasty is this and what emperor is it? Your Majesty, can you tell me what country name and year name you are? He said cautiously. The country's name is Daming, the year's name is Hongwu, and in August of the 25th year of Hongwu, it was stationed in the Gung garrison. The emperor said. Yang Feng took a deep breath, so he is now holding Zhu Yuanzhang hostage, holding a beggar who has taken down 1,000 miles of land, a tyrant who likes to peel off corrupt officials. Your Majesty, I will still follow your orders. He said. This emperor is really hard to deal with, so he still thinks it should be from the heart, otherwise he always feels like something is missing from his cool body. Your question is over, it's my turn to ask you. Who are you and where do you come from? To be honest, if you dare to lie to me, you will die. Don't think you can threaten me. You can't always be like this. As long as I leave within the reach of your firearm, you will only be 110 soldiers who want to kill you. Your long spear will eventually finish the potion, and my soldiers are 1 million. Even if there are thousands of rotations outside the palace, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the entire capital can go to the dead for me. I am the ruler of the world. Even if you kill out of the capital, there is still no place for you in this world. Emperor Hongwu of the Ming dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang, said calmly. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Fall down, your Great Ming has already passed away. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Fall down, your Great Ming has already passed away. Yang Feng looked at him with some hesitation, but soon made up his mind. Your Majesty, I must say that I came from over 600 years ago. Would you believe me? He said. More than 600 years later. Zhu Yuanzhang was stunned for a moment. Then he looked at Yang Feng with great interest. After more than 600 years, will it still be my Ming dynasty? He said. No, your Ming dynasty died in just 300 years. Yang Feng said candidly. Oh, can my Zhu family still have 300 years of history? Zhu Yuanzhang looked quite satisfied and said. Your Majesty, you don't seem to mind this number. Shouldn't you be angry at the death of your Ming dynasty in just 300 years? Yang Feng said unexpectedly. Since ancient times, there has never been an indestructible country. I have never thought of any real cause for eternity. Even with the strength of the Mongols, it would only last for 100 years. I could still have 300 years of land and mountains with cloth and clothing. What is there to be angry about? I think Han and Tang were just like that, and my Zhu family could not be inferior to Han and Tang. What regret do I have? What kind of talented and strategic person destroyed my Great Ming? Zhu Yuanzhang said with great interest. Tartars. Yang Feng said straightforwardly. Zhu Yuanzhang's face changed instantly, and then he patted the table and suddenly stood up. His daughter was so scared that she quickly knelt down again. The poor child was suppressed under her father's authority, no wonder it was so easy to coax. I expelled the Tartars and restored China. Do you think my Great Ming was destroyed by the Tartars again? He shouted loudly. I can tell he's really angry, even changing his self-proclaimed identity. Speaking of which, Yang Feng suddenly remembered that it seemed to be the first time he had used me to call himself, and his speech was not like a pretentious emperor, but rather a daily conversation. The founding king. The world was conquered by him, why bother pretending? Yes, Tartars. Not only that, they also almost exterminated your descendants. Your last emperor of the Ming dynasty was strangled to death with a bowstring, and one of your heirs to the throne hid among the people for decades. Eventually, they were found and more than 70 of them were killed. Fortunately, there are quite a few of your descendants, all of whom have reached hundreds of thousands, and many have been scattered among the people, so some have survived. However, in terms of the legitimacy of your throne, all descendants have been killed. I know you don't actually believe me and treat what I'm saying as a pastime, but what I'm saying is the truth. Your Great Ming dynasty was ultimately destroyed by the Tartars, and they even killed off your royal lineage. Yang Feng answered with great certainty. Zhu Yuanzhang looked at him very harshly. He actually couldn't believe what Yang Feng was from over 600 years ago, just treating it as a pastime. Listen to the story. Yang Feng is a storyteller. But, my million soldiers haven't saved the country. He said. He still wants to listen more. Even if it's a novel and exciting story, it's worth listening to. Speaking of his style, when ordinary ministers see him, they probably see him like a tiger with a wide open mouth. It is said that your million soldiers were not as good as dogs at that time, and the world was considered miserable. Your soldiers should have ranked first, and they were also trapped by your military status. The only way to escape was to flee and become bandits. Moreover, your Ming dynasty was not completely destroyed by the Tartars. In fact, your capital was conquered by the rebellious people. At that time, your descendant emperor hanged himself. Before being conquered, he cried and borrowed 1 million taels of silver from his courtiers to pay for guarding the city. Unfortunately, no one lent him. As a result, the rebellious people captured the capital and used tongs to kidnap those ministers, resulting in 70 million taels of silver. As for the Tartars, they only defected to the enemy and led them into the border because the generals who were originally guarding the border heard that their families were also being looted. In the end, they defeated the rebellious people and took the opportunity to destroy your Great Ming. Yang Feng said. Borrowing silver. Why did he borrow silver? Does he not have a clamp to use? How can a useless person who doesn't even know how to use a pincer be my offspring? Zhu Yuanzhang said in surprise. Who said it's not? I'm also curious, why did he borrow silver? Yang Feng said. They actually have a lot in common. Don't mention this kind of waste again. It's frustrating to think about it. What kind of Tartars and remnants are they? Zhu Yuanzhang said. No, they call themselves Jurchen. Yang Feng said. New Ji. She's just a new Ji Yaren, struggling to survive in the mountains and forests in the north of Liaodong. A few years ago, a few others came out to pay tribute to me and beg for protection. Can they destroy my Great Ming? It's ridiculous. You must have made up a story more truthfully. Even if you say, the revival of the disabled Yuan, it's easier for me to believe it than New Ji Yaren. Zhu Yuanzhang sneered. Yang Feng smiled slightly, whether he believed it or not. How could my million soldiers live a worse life than dogs? They have land, money and food, and are not lacking in clothing and food, all of which are distributed by the court. Even if the world is peaceful in the future and there will be no more wars, they will eventually not suffer from hunger and cold. How can they live a worse life than dogs? Zhu Yuanzhang continued to ask. Do you have any officers withholding military rations now? Yes, before that, more than 10 people including Sun Qi, 1,000 households of the Xianyang Guard, who had captured the soldiers' monthly rations, were all exiled by me to the outskirts. How can you ensure that your descendants will be as strict as you are? Yang Feng said. Zhu Yuanzhang immediately fell silent. It is obvious that he also knows that Yang Feng is right. Do you have officers enslaving soldiers now? Yes, previously, the commanders of Shizhou Guard, Lo Xian, and Xuanan Guard, Su Yi, and others, were all private soldiers who were beheaded by me. Can you guarantee that your descendants will also be beheaded like you? Yang Feng said. Zhu Yuanzhang remained silent. Do you have officers squeezing military households' money now? Yes, before, Li Long and others, the vanguard of Datong, used various excuses to suppress and harm the army. They were also sent to remote areas as soldiers by me, allowing them to experience the hardships of ordinary soldiers on their own. What about those who casually kill military households? Yes, many officers including Wang Difu, 100 households of the Baotao Guard, killed soldiers with minor incidents, and after the incident, I beheaded them to pay for their lives. You see, even if you're alive, they dare not. How can you guarantee that after you're gone, they won't dare to intensify their efforts? If all the officers in the world are like this, even more ruthless than this, then your military households are not living worse than dogs. At least dogs have their owners to feed them, and your military households don't even have them. It's not a joke to expect such an army to bravely kill enemies to protect your Zhu family. You knew you were starving, so you might as well go all out and fight. So why can't they stand up and fight when they are being squeezed like this? Most of the rebellious people are your military households. By the way, the common people also composed a song to welcome those who led them to rebel. Seeking promotion in the morning and seeking harmony in the evening. Recently, the poor have been struggling to survive. They have opened the door early to worship the king of Chuang and are happy to discipline everyone. Kill cattle and sheep, prepare wine and drink, open the city gate to welcome the king, but when the king comes, he does not accept food. Is it a bit like those poor people who rebelled with you and fought against the world back then? It is said that you stripped corrupt officials of their skin and turned them into grass, but even after you disappeared, the Ming dynasty was still a corrupt official. As a descendant of the emperor's great scholar, your family is said to have 400,000 acres of land, and there are thousands of servants who specialize in spinning for him to make money. Moreover, your culture is noble and your martial arts are humble. The most capable general claims to be a lackey in front of the great scholar. Those literati even wrote about you as a tyrant, claiming that you were a hero in killing and persecuting literati. In short, compared to Emperor Yang of Sui, you were not much different, and even your descendants were persuaded by them to believe that you were true. When governing the country, they would go against you. By the way, they also painted a portrait of you, making your face look like a pig's waist, and then told future generations that you will look like that. And his face was covered in pockmarks. Yang Feng said. Zhu Yuanzhang took a deep breath and suddenly raised the gun in his hand. Yang Feng also raised his gun at the fastest speed. Zhu Yuanzhang sneered, then he put down the gun again. Your Majesty, we are all more rational. If you want me to be honest, I will be honest. There is not a single lie I say. Whether you believe it or not, I have already told you my true identity. I was inexplicably thrown here over 600 years later. I am also a soldier, but just an ordinary soldier. All these things on me are from over 600 years later. At that time, there were no more emperors. The group of Tartars who destroyed your Ming dynasty also ruled for nearly 300 years. They were the last emperor, and there will be no more emperors in the future. In our era, there is no high or low status, and everyone is equal, so your true dragon emperor is not much to me. I am not afraid of death either. Your era doesn't have much to like for me either. Living in your era is actually better for me than dying. There is nothing worth my nostalgia for here, no family, no friends, no everything I am familiar with. It's best not to force me too hard. It's just a matter of exchanging lives. It's not in vain for me to come here and die together with an emperor. Let me show you something fun. Yang Feng said, putting down his backpack, taking out a laser pointer from inside and shining it at His Majesty the Emperor. Of course, it's not just for the eyes of others. He's providing guidance for guided bombs, not like the small flashlight hanging on a gun. Although this can also be mounted on a gun, it's actually a big thing, including many functions such as ranging. Similarly, the power is also very high, and this distance can cause burns not only to the eyes but also to the body. Therefore, immediately after, on the table in front of His Majesty the Emperor, a memorial emitted smoke, and then instinctively rose up and fell back, burning in the middle. Your Majesty, it's best for you to believe what I'm saying, because I'm really from over 600 years ago, and you can also call me a traveler. Yang Feng smiled and said. Zhu Yuanzhang looked at the burning flames on the table in front of him, then at the laser pointer in his hand. His brow furrowed and he was clearly a bit confused. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Elopement. Elopement is the best thing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Elopement. Elopement is the best thing, take him to Wangjiang Tower. Zhu Yuanzhang remained silent for a while before slowly speaking as he watched the fire go out. Yang Feng calmly looked at his daughter, take me to Wangjiang Tower. He poked the Royal Highness Princess who was still in a foolish and cute state. Ah. Oh. The princess said. Then he quickly bowed to her father and retreated like he had been granted amnesty. Yang Feng turned around and twisted her head together. The two of them walked towards the palace door, and the eunuch guarding outside opened the door. They walked out together. Go to Wangjiang Tower. Yang Fengchao, who was clearly the head of a eunuch, said. The eunuch leader looks at the little princess. The little princess nodded faintly. He immediately called for 2 eunuchs, led the way with lanterns, and walked out of this large courtyard through the pitch-black palace, constantly passing through doors, and finally arrived at a garden with a large hall inside. However, Yang Feng was taken into a very large building, which was still inside the harem, but it was already in the northeast corner, and from a high vantage point, one could roughly see the city wall not far from the outside. He should have alarmed the outside long ago when he opened fire. There were a large number of torches and lanterns moving outside, and the other few that were supposed to be the city gates were lit up. Obviously, there were also a large number of soldiers on guard. If the immortals have orders, they can ask these maids to do it. However, this is a forbidden palace. Without the will of the long-lived Lord, the immortals will not be able to go downstairs. The eunuch's leader said humbly. House arrest, I understand. Yang Feng said. Immortals are so funny. The eunuch leader said. Is she here too? Yang Feng pointed to the little princess. The 14th daughter of the emperor was a disciple of a fairy, and she naturally served the fairy here without the explicit consent of the Wansui lord. The maidservant then arranged a room for the 14th daughter of the emperor. Although the 14th daughter of the emperor was destined to be a fairy, she was ultimately honored as an imperial daughter, and she was still young, with many trivial matters that she did not understand. The immortal body was more understanding. The eunuch's leader said clearly with some indication. After he finished speaking, he took leave. He had already gone out, and the little princess finally came to her senses. I'll serve you. She exclaimed in shock. Yang Feng threw his backpack onto the ground, dropped his gun onto the coffee table, removed his tactical vest, and threw it onto the coffee table as well. He then sat rudely on the Grand Tutor's chair, crossed his legs, and looked at her. There's a lot to be done with this service, isn't it? Come and give me a leg beating first. He said. Pooh. The little princess gave a direct scolding. However, there was no father here, and she was clearly in a different state. She walked directly to the other side and sat down on the Grand Tutor's chair, curiously tugging at Yang Feng's tactical vest and even glancing at him. Yang Feng gave her a silent glare and then looked at a young eunuch, who quickly stepped forward. What instructions does the immortal have? He said. Go get some food. Yang Feng said. He had just finished speaking when he suddenly heard a familiar faint sound. He turned his head as quickly as he could, facing the sudden cold sweat emanating from his forehead, and watched the bewildered little princess holding a grenade, with the safety pull ring pulled out on the index finger of the other hand. Little ancestor, don't move. Yang Feng said with a tremolo. The little princess snorted coquettishly and casually placed it on the coffee table. Yang Feng grabbed her hand holding the grenade like lightning, and her face turned red. She let out a scream of obvious embarrassment and anger, then desperately pulled back. Accompanied by the sound of footsteps outside, her father walked in again, staring at the scene with wide eyes. Yang Feng didn't care about anything else, grabbed her hand, grabbed the pressure plate, and then dragged her to the window as quickly as possible. He looked outside and saw that it was a rockery, making sure no one was there. Let go. He let out a loud roar. The little princess instinctively let go, then threw the grenade outside and watched it fall into the fake mountain. Boom! The loud explosion of modern hand grenades instantly shook the night sky of the 14th century. Ah! The little princess let out a scream and instantly pouted on the ground. Don't move around, it will be fatal. Yang Feng lowered his head and said sincerely. Is this your earth-shaking thunder? Zhu Yuanzhang, who had already reached the window, said. Then he looked at his daughter, who was still lying on the ground with her head hugged and her posture was not elegant, and speechlessly kicked her with his foot. Get out! He shouted. The little princess finally cried with a loud cry. However, under her father's accumulated strength, she instinctively got up and ran out crying. The eunuch leader also quickly left with the young eunuch. Zhu Yuanzhang sat down directly on the eunuch's chair and took out another grenade from Yang Feng's tactical vest. However, he was clearly more cautious than his daughter. He hooked the safety pull ring and, in Yang Feng's momentary nervous gaze, placed it on the tea table. Yang Feng quickly stepped forward and picked it up again. He only has 4 in total, and 1 has already been wasted. It's interesting that this thing is so small but has such power. Zhu Yuanzhang said with great interest. Your Majesty, don't think about it anymore. It's not filled with gunpowder. 1 pound of what's inside has an estimated power of dozens of pounds of gunpowder, but I don't understand how to do it. Yang Feng quickly dispelled his thoughts. Since you don't understand anything, why should I keep you? Zhu Yuanzhang changed his face instantly and shouted with a murderous expression on his face. Yang Feng hooked the pull ring as quickly as possible. Your Majesty, this thing is safe, and this pressure plate is also safe. If I release it again after pulling it out, it will really explode, leaving no survivors within 20 steps. He said. You have to play hard against His Majesty the Emperor. This emperor is too cunning to engage in scheming with people like him. Even 10 of them cannot compete with him, and he is the simplest and most rough. Zhu Yuanzhang sneered and then looked at him. Who will succeed me to the throne? His Majesty the Emperor suddenly said. Yang Feng took a deep breath. I don't know. He said straightforwardly. I really don't know. Zhu Yuanzhang shouted sternly. Your Majesty, would a soldier under your command know which emperors were in the Tang dynasty? I will be an ordinary soldier in the army in 600 years. How could I possibly know so much? Yang Feng said. Zhu Yuanzhang looked at him with a murderous expression on his face, while Yang Feng calmly hooked on the pull ring, posing as if we couldn't pull it down. Then the 2 of them looked at each other up close. You better not really know. His Majesty the Emperor suddenly stood up and sneered. Then he walked away so proudly. Listening to his footsteps heading downstairs, Yang Feng finally took a deep breath. Ma, accompanying you is like accompanying a tiger. We can't stay in this place, we need to run quickly. He muttered to himself. With Zhu Yuanzhang's mind, of course, he wouldn't believe that he really didn't know. His Majesty the Emperor secretly came to talk to him about this issue, starting to believe that he came from 600 years later. His previous mention of the military household also proved that he had some understanding of the Ming dynasty. Therefore, it is impossible not to know who succeeded Zhu Yuanzhang after his death. And His Majesty the Emperor clearly attaches great importance to this issue. It is now August of the 25th year of the Hongwu reign, which means that his crown prince Zhu Biao has just died. Zhu Yunwen is about to be appointed as the crown prince. Zhu Yuanzhang urgently needs to know whether his grandson will succeed to the throne smoothly after his death. But this topic is too dangerous. This is not something that outsiders should know at all. Tell him that Zhu Yunwen will succeed to the throne smoothly, so once it is leaked, will Zhu Yuanzhang think that his fate is in vain. And then gradually grass grows in my heart. Tell him that Zhu Yuanzhang will succeed to the throne smoothly and be usurped in a few years. Once it's leaked, how do the two of them get along? How did Zhu Yuanzhang deal with Zhu Di? Will Zhu Di be scared to do something he shouldn't do? Other feudal lords know that Zhu Yuanzhang will deal with them. Will they cause trouble with Zhu Di? It can be said that as long as it was leaked, it would be chaos, and Zhu Yuanzhang should be very clear that only dead people can keep it confidential. He kicked his daughter out without seeing him. It can be said that when he asked this question, Yang Feng had already been sentenced to death. So it cannot be said. Not to mention still alive, but just alive. It doesn't mean that in half an hour, this place won't be surrounded by a large number of royal guards, and he will be arrested and tortured in prison, even forever imprisoned in the dungeon. We need to run quickly. Yang Feng quickly put on his vest, put on his backpack, and then opened the window. He had just flipped out when the door opened. He poked his head into the door and looked at him in shock as he was about to escape. Yang Feng smiled awkwardly, and then the little princess crawled in. She even turned back and shouted, "Everyone step down, I want to talk to the immortal master," she said. Then she walked in directly, closed the door, and ran quickly to Yang Feng's side. "Bring me along, otherwise I'll shout." She tugged at Yang Feng and said fiercely. "Just let me go." Yang Feng said melancholically. "No way, you scammer. You said you wanted to take me out. If you don't take me away, I'll call someone. Besides, do you know how to get out? There are soldiers from the imperial city outside, with thousands of rotating personal guards." The little princess said. "You're just a princess waiting to get married in the palace, and then you can be happy and domineering outside. It's not good to live a lifetime of luxury and luxury. What good days can you have if you follow me out? I'll have to be chased by your father, maybe I can't even afford to eat. If something unexpected happens, I won't be able to save my life. Good boy, listen to my brother's words, the outside world is very dangerous and not suitable for you, a little white rabbit." Yang Feng said speechlessly. "No, if you don't take me away, I'll call someone." The little princess tugged at him and spoke firmly. Yang Feng glared at her, flipped it back as quickly as possible, then quickly opened his backpack and threw out those with limited usefulness. He then picked up the little princess and stuffed her directly into it. It was just a 12 or 13-year-old girl, and she was also relatively thin enough to fit half of her body. With just a press, it was almost enough. In the midst of her shy and angry grinding of her teeth, Yang Feng saw that there was still some space left and stuffed a few discarded items into it. Only then did he zip up the zipper to expose her arms and head. "Hold on to my shoulder, otherwise I won't be responsible if it falls off," he said. After speaking, he picked up his backpack. The little princess, curled up inside, was so scared that she quickly put her hands under his ribs and hugged his shoulders tightly. Yang Feng carried her on his back, grabbed the rope, and flipped out the window again. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. 8 Generations of Poor Farmers in Your Family. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. 8 Generations of Poor Farmers in Your Family, Can We Find a Different Way? The little princess trembled all over and stuttered as she spoke. At this moment, she was holding Yang Feng tightly, like a cat forced to the riverbank, because she was like a wind chime hanging under the eaves, with a thin rope draped over her head, carrying the two of them with its terrifying delicacy. Below them was a ground that was more than 10 meters high. A gust of night wind blew by, and they swayed like wind chimes. "Don't move around, I won't be responsible if you fall." Yang Feng, with an 8-character ring hanging on his waist and a rope in his hand, said sincerely. The little princess wanted to cry without tears. "Actually, you can give up. I really don't want to take you with me," Yang Feng said. The little princess shook her head without hesitation. "Stretch your head and open your mouth. Yan Feng said. She poked her head in confusion and opened her mouth. Yan Feng immediately stuffed a pre-prepared cloth ball into her mouth. She widened her eyes and let out a whimpering protest. Don't spit it out. Yan Feng shouted. She humbly accepted the foreign object in her mouth. At the next moment, Yan Feng's hand loosened, and the double-stranded rope he had originally tightly grasped quickly slid down after being rubbed by the 8-shaped ring. He began to rapidly descend, suspended in mid-air. The little princess screamed in terror, but due to the cloth in her mouth, she could only make a dull sound. It was only then that she understood the purpose of this thing. She screamed and instinctively buried her head, isolated from the terrifying physics of the world, feeling gravity and the sound of the wind in her ears. However, soon with Yang Feng's body beating, it was all over. She opened her eyes again and was already downstairs. Which way? Yang Feng pulled out the cloth ball from her mouth and asked in a low voice. The little princess immediately pointed to the right, and Yang Feng put on his night vision device and crawled into the pitch-black rockery and flower bushes ahead. They didn't notice that a pair of eyes were looking at them with interest on a small building behind them. The two of them quickly advanced in the darkness and were soon blocked by high walls. However, this obstacle was not worth mentioning to Yang Feng. After climbing over it, they continued to move forward through corridors, high walls, and courtyards, and finally reached the bottom of the city wall. Soldiers were walking on the city wall, but the two of them didn't dare to move. They waited carefully in the dark until these soldiers walked away. Yang Feng then threw a rope and hooked it onto the women's wall, where he used a night vision device to observe the area again. After confirming that no one was around, he quickly climbed up. This kind of city wall is not straight upwards, in fact, it has a certain slope, and it is easy to step on with green bricks. He quickly climbed up the city wall by grasping the climbing rope, and then flipped out at the fastest speed. This kind of city wall doesn't require any assistance, just a rope is enough. After landing, he retracted the rope. Then he turned around and looked dumbfounded. Outside is a river several tens of meters wide, with sparkling waves reflecting the lights on the city walls. On the other side of the river, there are dense buildings where patrol lights are moving, and some buildings are illuminated. And after stretching for hundreds of meters, these buildings still end up with towering city walls. How deep is it? He asked with his back against the city wall. 3 zhang. The little princess answered. I still think we should abandon you. Yan Feng said. If you dare to abandon me, I'll shout. The opposite side is full of pro-military guards and craftsmen. As soon as I shout, you won't be able to escape. There is a bridge to the south, but at the end of the bridge is Donghua Gate, where there are on-duty pro-military guards and firearms. The little princess said. How many pro-military guards are there in the opposite area? Yang Feng asked. The 12 guards take turns, with 5,000 soldiers per guard. It's hard to say how many people will be on duty, as these 12 guards will be stationed on one side and take turns on duty. The little princess said. So it's just 60,000 people rotating in 4 shifts, and even in 3 shifts, there are also thousands of people. And this is not the Ming army that was on the verge of collapse later on. This is the 25th year of the Hongwu reign, where all the generals, soldiers, and soldiers have experienced countless battles, especially the most elite troops, including the imperial guards and emperor's personal soldiers. He needs to carry a burden, cross a river several tens of meters wide and 3 zhang deep, and then pass through a defense area guarded by at least a few thousand elite soldiers, and there is also a city wall ahead. Moreover, there are many obvious patrols on the city walls, where you can see many lights constantly moving. If you know how to swim, you can carry me on the water route. Let's swim south and pass through Donghua Gate to reach the area around Taimiao, which is secluded and uninhabited. Then move forward all the way to the south wall of the imperial city and flip over. She continued speaking. You princess, don't you want to study how to escape from the palace without playing music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Yang Feng looked at her with a speechless expression on his face. There is no one to accompany me to play in the palace. My elder brother used to come to me, but now he has also gone to the fiefdom, leaving me alone. In the palace, I feel like I'm in prison. You just need to take me out, and I can take you to my elder brother's place. He was granted the title of King of Liao, and his fiefdom is Guangning. I don't know where he is, far left and right. It is said that he is thousands of miles away, and when you get there, he will give you anything you want. The little princess tempted him. Yang Feng simply put her down, then picked her up and casually placed her aside. You can't leave me behind. The little princess is in a hurry. Yang Feng ignored her. He rearranged his backpack there to seal the contents, blew air into the air bags on both sides, carried the backpack behind her, grabbed her belt and picked it up. Then he went straight into the water, threw the backpack on the water as a buoy, and threw the distinguished Royal Highness Princess up. She instinctively lay on the buoy, but her body still had to go into the water. I am a princess. The little princess, who could no longer bear his rudeness, was filled with grief and anger. Oh. Yang Feng agreed. Then he ignored her and made a float out of his raincoat, then dragged his backpack and swam deep into the water. Royal Highness Princess was so frightened that he clung to his backpack. As he dragged forward, the two men quietly headed south on a dark river. In order to ensure privacy, Yang Feng tried to be close to the bank. After all, there were some reeds and water plants to cover it. Quickly, they arrived at Donghua Gate. There were indeed many figures on the city wall, but no one paid attention to them below, and the lights on the wall were also difficult to shine on them. The two of them climbed into the bridge without any danger, passed through Donghua Gate Bridge, and continued forward. After crossing the corner tower, they entered the transverse section of the river. However, there was a narrower river mouth on the opposite side. The little princess pointed to it and Yang Feng swam over. After entering this river, there was nothing to worry about because there were dense trees on both sides, and behind the trees on the right was a towering building, Tai Temple. The little princess said with a clearly suppressed excitement. Your ancestors of the Zhu family have 8 generations of poor peasants. Yang Feng said. Of course, this is just a description. The ancestors of the Zhu family were supposed to be self-cultivated farmers in the Jiangnan region. Later, they were transferred to the gold mining households by the Yuan dynasty. In fact, the local tycoons were just trying to annex their land. The officials and gentry colluded in non-gold mining areas to transfer the self-cultivated farmers to the gold mining households. This was to pay gold to the government, and in the end, they had to buy gold and submit it themselves. This was definitely not feasible, and they had to abandon their land and flee, and the land naturally fell into the hands of the local tycoons. No wonder Zhu Yuanzhang dealt a heavy blow to the powerful landlords in Jiangnan. The Zhu family fled to the Fengyang area and could only become tenants, farming everywhere to barely survive. I really struggled to survive, as can be seen from the birthplaces of the Zhu Yuanzhang brothers. His eldest brother and second brother were all born in different places, one in Shui, one in Wuhe, and one in Zhongli. This means that their family had been constantly changing employers during those years, like refugees who brought them to landlords as tenants. This also belongs to the lowest level among tenants. In ancient times, it was patrilineal. Tenants of the same clan planted good land, while those with different surnames planted poor land. These wandering tenants planted the worst land. No wonder they all starved to death. What about the 8th generation of poor farmers? Isn't my father the supreme ruler of the world now? The little princess said proudly. Yang Feng is speechless. But then he glanced at the little princess's arm and maliciously poked it. The latter still maintained the royal arrogance, lowered his head and glanced down. With the faint light of Yang Feng's watch, he could see a small animal wriggling there. Then, her pupils dilated and she opened her mouth, ready to scream. Yang Feng covered her as quickly as possible, and as she twisted wildly, he took a leech off her arm. This is you. Yang Feng smiled in front of her, holding a leech. The frightened little princess was not interested in anything else. Just like everyone who had encountered the same thing, she searched for it in fear and even opened her collar to look inside, but I can't see anything. Yang Feng continued swimming happily ahead, while the little princess continued to examine her body in terror from behind. The two of them arrived at the end of the river, where an equally tall city wall lay ahead, and the river water passed through the water gate below, except that inside the gate was an iron fence. I always feel like we came out a bit too smoothly. Yang Feng, who climbed up the city wall in the same way as before, stood in the night breeze and looked at the ancient city ahead. It is indeed a bit smooth and abnormal. Previously, there were gunshots and explosions inside the palace, even if the gunshots didn't have a significant impact, just handguns. However, the explosion of hand grenades was different. If there were such explosions, not only inside the imperial city, but outside the city, they would probably have been alarmed. If tens of thousands of soldiers were to take turns, the walls of the imperial city would have been heavily guarded by now, but they had no obstacles along the way. Patrols do indeed exist, but they are only limited to normal patrols. There are indeed a large number of soldiers at the city gate, but these soldiers clearly did not enter a state of readiness. This is abnormal. This is not the deposed pro-military guards of the late Ming dynasty. Stop talking nonsense, hurry up and leave. I can finally leave the palace. The little princess said excitedly behind him. Out of the palace, I'll find a place to sell you. Yang Feng said angrily. After speaking, he remembered something. Do you have any money on you? He asked. Money. Why bring money? Are you talking about treasure money? I don't have that thing. Do you think I still need to buy things by myself? The little princess said in confusion. Okay, I really have to find a place to sell you. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Princess's Elopement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Princess's Elopement. How can I get there again? Yang Feng, who had stepped down from the city wall, asked. At this moment, he had two choices in front of him. Heading south, but still facing the river ahead. Heading east, which was closest to the east city wall, was blocked by a large area of buildings in the middle. Are you asking me? I lived for 12 years and haven't been out of the palace many times. The little princess spoke confidently. Don't ask me, do you ask me? I haven't been here for 3 hours yet. Yang Feng also spoke confidently. We don't need to rush out of the city, do we? We can play in the city for a few days first. I heard those palace maids say there are many fun things in the city, and we have already left the palace. Then, how can we get to Guangning? Shouldn't we calculate first? Do you know where Guangning is? Do we take a boat, a horse, or a car? I know how to ride horses, and also, is it far from here? How many days do we need to walk? The little princess was excitedly imagining her future on his back. Shut up. Yang Feng has completely given up on her. This product is completely beyond our expectations. He leaned against the city wall and hid in the shadow of the horse's face, looking at the grand city in front of him, and then made a decision heading east. To the south is the official district. Half of the court's yamen are located in the south. He leaned against the city wall and headed east, while the little princess closed her mouth in dissatisfaction on his back. The outskirts of the imperial city are open spaces. Although the fireplaces, lanterns, and torches above the city wall have limited lighting capabilities, if the patrolling soldiers are diligent enough, they can still be easily detected as long as they leave the shadow area. What can protect them now is the dark shadow under this lamp. The little princess poked at him with obvious impatience. Yang Feng turned his head and glared at her discontentedly, only to realize that her expression was a bit strange, and there was a noticeable twist in her backpack. Yang Feng continued to look at her with confusion. Wang. Suddenly, a dog barked from above. What person? Immediately after, angry cheers rang out. Yang Feng ran forward without any hesitation, almost simultaneously with the sound of gongs behind him. Thieves have violated the ban. The shout also sounded. Yang Feng, carrying the little princess on his back, quickly reached the riverbank ahead of him with the fastest speed he could reach. At the same time, the sound of breaking through the air sounded, and he suddenly fell forward, rolling into the river as the sharp arrow passed by. The unlucky little princess was still screaming with her mouth open, and was suddenly pushed into the river by him. Although he immediately flipped out, he was also filled with water and rolled his eyes. Yang Feng was not interested in caring about her feelings. He pulled out his arms in the water, pushed his backpack, and swam towards the opposite bank with all his might. More soldiers rushed out of the corner tower on the city wall behind him, and 2 bows from the group of soldiers who found him continued to shoot arrows at him, with one arrow even hitting his helmet. Fortunately, the river was much narrower, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived on the opposite bank. Don't shoot arrows, your 14th Empress is here. He shouted. After saying that, he took out the little princess and turned on the light on the watch carefully, looking at the face of the Royal Highness Princess who was still spitting water. Stop. Shouts rang out from the city wall. Immediately after, an officer walked out in the shape of an officer. I don't recognize the 14th daughter of the Emperor. Just wait, I'll find someone I recognize to come over. He said. How do you like it? Anyway, I left you with the person. Yang Feng was not fooled by him, and the sound of alarm gongs around him was constantly ringing. If there was any further delay, it would probably be a few thousand people gathered around. He directly placed the little princess on the ground, then carried her backpack and left. However, the little princess, who was still spitting water, suddenly woke up and hugged his leg without hesitation, like a koala bear, dragged along with Yang Feng's steps. You can't leave me behind. Dad knows I dare to escape from the palace and will kill me. She was crying and howling. Yang Feng looked back awkwardly at the officer. The latter also stared at them in amazement. Then at the west gate, the gate slowly opened without hesitation. Yang Feng picked up the little princess. The latter, who was very sensible, extended his legs into his backpack and was still looking at him with a pleasing gaze. Yang Feng looked apologetically at the officer, who was holding a bow and arrow in his hand, but ultimately did not shoot. At this moment, he could probably guess that this was the 14th daughter of the Emperor. Even though the 14th daughter had learned to elope at a young age, she was also an imperial daughter. If accidentally injured, it would be a case of stealing the family. Just as he and the soldiers silently watched, Yang Feng once again carried his backpack. The city gate has also been opened. I dare not shoot arrows, this is a princess. Yang Feng said sincerely. Then he turned around and ran towards the east. But then a large number of lights rushed towards him directly in front of the eastern city wall, and soldiers also rushed out of the building. He quickly turned his head south. Cavalry rushed out from the western city gate. He ran wildly through a wide street and rushed straight to the bottom of a wall. Cavalry swarmed in, and without hesitation, he threw out a grenade. The explosion caused the vanguard and 2 horses to kneel at the same time. The cavalry quickly dodged from behind, and Yang Feng threw the rope out of his hand, ignoring where the pipe was hooked. He pulled the rope up to the wall, and a cavalry rushed over, stabbing with a spear in his hand. I am the 14th daughter of the Emperor. The little princess let out a scream. The cavalry was so frightened that they suddenly swung their spears, piercing the blue bricks on the wall. Yang Feng immediately flipped in with the little princess on his back, put away the rope, and ran forward wildly. It was unknown where it was, but it was all rows of buildings. He ran recklessly inside, and people kept running out of the buildings, all staring at them in amazement. However, soon he didn't put on any clothes and rushed out with his sword, clearly wanting to intercept. Yang Feng rushed straight to him and cut off his sword, grabbing his wrist and punching him head-on. The person screamed and fell down. Then Yang Feng continued to sprint forward, walking wherever there was a door and climbing over the wall when there was no door. He walked through the buildings like a parkour. The soldiers chasing behind were clearly still chasing, and their shouts could be heard. And not only from the back, but even from the right, the roar of war horses can be heard. That should be the entrance to this building. The encirclement is forming. I can't leave the city. Yang Feng looked at the dense lights on the southern city wall and said. Indeed, it's impossible to get out. The eastern city wall is also densely lit, and even the western wall has a dense light source that can be seen. It has to be said that the reaction speed of the Ming army at this time was sharp enough. In a short period of time, the entire city defense system had already entered wartime. The current situation is definitely not going to be able to break through hard. Just his rifle with 7 magazines, not even a single bullet can flush out. Moreover, the Ming army also used firearms extensively at this time. Although the firearm gun cannot move his bulletproof vest, but they have cannons. Even if the cannons of the early Ming dynasty were primitive, they could still produce the Hongwu iron cannon. 21 cm caliber. Not to mention the gunpowder-fired shells, throwing a stone ball with a diameter of 21 centimeters at him was enough to kill him. What should I do? If my dad catches me, I'll have to be beaten to death. The little princess said anxiously. Shut up. Yang Feng shouted. He immediately ran towards the well not far away, without hesitation, drilling in, spreading his legs and arms to support him, and then continuously descending, quickly reaching the bottom. At this moment, chaotic shouts outside rang out, followed by the friction of armor and running footsteps. Yang Feng carried the little princess on his back and continued to descend, entering the well water without stopping, until the well water overflowed their necks. Look into the well. The previous sound sounded. Yang Feng reached out and grabbed the mud on the well wall, directly smearing it onto the little princess's face. The latter stared at him with wide eyes, but dared not speak. Yang Feng himself pulled up his mask and at the same time, a torch appeared on top. In the light of the torch was a face. The person casually threw the torch down and used the light before it went out to observe underground. But Yang Feng only had his head outside, and he wore a mask with a camouflage helmet on his head. Although the little princess had more exposure to the water because her backpack had not deflated on both sides, her head was outside her backpack, which was also camouflaged. Her face was smeared with mud, and the soldiers did not see anything unusual in that brief light. 100 households, no one. He said. Let's continue searching. Baihu said. The two of them took a deep breath underwater. Then they listened quietly underwater until the voices of the soldiers disappeared. But Yang Feng still didn't dare to go up, instead he moved the water upwards and persisted for more than 10 minutes before carefully climbing out. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. The two of them lay exhausted on the ground. Why are you suffering? Yang Feng said. You've been locked up in one place for over a decade, don't you want to run if there's a chance? The little princess said. Where's your mother? Yang Feng asked. I lost it when I was very young. The little princess said. Yang Feng nodded sympathetically. Indeed, a princess who lost her biological mother at a very young age, and also had a strict father like Lao Zhu, probably believed in stick-based education in her children, and had a serious traditional ideology. Although she came from 8 generations of poor farmers, she still followed the principles of Neo-Confucianism in her children's requirements, trying to make her descendants fully integrate into the literati. This can be seen from his concern for Zhu Xi. After being confined to such an environment for more than 10 years, it is really time to rebel. Let's get dressed and change first, otherwise we won't be able to go out like this. He turned over and said. This question is very important. He's like a cicada monkey in a pile of scarab beetles when he goes out. He looked around and saw that it should be a small garden surrounded by buildings. To the south was a high wall, the same as the one he had climbed over when he entered, and he had never climbed over such a wall before. That means he didn't actually run out of this yamen after he came in. This yamen is very big. What is the first yamen outside the imperial city from north to the east? He asked. Let's go to the Hanlin Academy. I haven't gone out of the palace many times in total, and I only walked out of the Hongwu gate through the imperial path on the side of the 1,000-step corridor. They were all guarded by our own army and couldn't play around casually. Those palace maids have said that, if I remember correctly, it was the Hanlin Academy. The little princess said. She also curiously observed the surroundings while speaking. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Old Master of Hanlin is indeed charming and charming. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The Old Master of Hanlin is indeed charming and charming. Hanlin Academy, this Hanlin Master is indeed charming and charming. Young Feng, wearing a night vision device, turned his back to the faint dawn outside the window and looked at the Hanlin Master on the bed like a terrifying demon. The latter looked at him in terror. The little book boy lying side by side also looked at him in terror. Don't shout, I'm just here to borrow something. Yang Feng said sincerely. Then he pressed down the sword that originally belonged to the Hanlin Master in his hand. The cold blade pressed against the necks of the Hanlin Master and his little book boy. The two of them quickly blinked and said they didn't know how to scream. From their perspective, this was really a demon in front of them. At the same time, a small demon with a blue face and a disheveled head emerged from behind the demon. Then, they reached out their black claws, grabbed their clothes, and looked at them curiously, especially the little book boy. The little children were all scared and crying. Then I saw the demon take out a demon tool and face the Hanlin Master. In an instant, a dazzling light shot out, and the Hanlin Master, who had been stabbed in the eye, let out a scream. Of course, the mouth was covered by the demon. The light instantly disappeared. This is the Soul Reaper. I have already taken your soul. If you are sensible, you will naturally put it back at this time tomorrow. If you dare to report to the government, then tomorrow will be the time when your soul is completely shattered. The demon said in a gloomy tone. The Hanlin Master, whose eyes were still stimulated by strong light and had not returned to normal, nodded eagerly. The demon waved to the little demon with satisfaction, quietly exiting the room together, and kindly closed the door for them. Half an hour later. Two sneaky figures appeared on the street at dawn. A woman was wearing a blue robe, and her body was very plump, as if she was wearing a pregnant woman's outfit. She also carried a huge package wrapped in curtains or other materials on her back, but she wore a square hat on her head. Moreover, because the clothes were obviously not long enough, the hem even reached her calves, revealing the black boots on her feet and the strange colored pants on top. And the little boy with him was wearing a faded black cloth round-necked shirt and a small hat on his head, but because the hem was too long, it even dragged to the ground. As he walked, he would occasionally mention it, then reveal the obvious silk inside. Why are they all looking at us? Young Feng looked around at the pedestrians stopping in confusion and said. The little princess shook her head, because her skin was too fair and tender, she didn't look like a common person at this time, so Yang Feng forcibly applied something inexplicable to her face. I even painted my hands. She is now looking at her strangely colored hands in anger. We shouldn't have any problems. Yang Feng looked confidently at his green robe. Then he continued to move forward with confidence, only to find that the pedestrians he met all had strange eyes and a few were whispering something. Please stay, Your Excellency. Suddenly, a voice came from behind. Yang Feng and his wife turned their heads and looked at a middle-aged man wearing a blue cloth shirt and a double-winged hat. The latter approached and bowed with an arched hand. Little official, Li Fu, the Minister of War and Horse in Dongcheng. How do you address him? he said. I am. Yang Feng is speechless. He is Zhang Xianzong, the editor of the Hanlin Academy. The little princess quickly said. Then he gestured to Yang Feng with his gaze that the name was fine. It turned out to be Zhang Hanlin, but I was impolite. It was also an honor for me to meet the Duke of Hanlin here. I wonder if the Duke of Hanlin would appreciate it and come to the tea house for a chat. Li Fu nodded humbly with a smile on his face. Well, I don't need it anymore. I have an urgent matter, let's talk about it another day. Yang Feng said. The situation is not good, it may be exposed. Hanlin Gong, I still have to ask Hanlin Gong to show my respect. Li Fu sneered. The people around who were originally watching quickly gathered around, one by one looking at Yang Feng with unfriendly eyes. Some of them, although without weapons, clearly understood how to cooperate, while the two servants behind Li Fu drew their swords, and not far away, two people were rushing with a large number of soldiers. The little princess also panicked and quickly hid behind Yang Feng. Yang Feng quickly pulled out his rifle from his arms, which no one knew. Even if he thrust diagonally into his chest, it didn't matter. However, because no one knew him, no one would be afraid. Zhang Xianzong, the editor of the Hanlin Academy. Zhang Hanlin is from Fujian, and you can speak Min dialect. Even with your appearance, the true Hanlin is not dignified and should be dismissed. This little boy is dragging the ground, and it's time to take him to the yamen to fight. The two of them are dressed up like this, but they walk on the street with dignity. Do you think this capital is all blind? Li Fu said. Yang Feng turned his head and glared angrily at the little princess. Look at what I'm doing, I'm only 12. The little princess confidently displayed herself. Yang Feng is speechless. Let's go, Duke Hanlin. Since we don't want to go to the tea house, we can only go to the yamen. Li Fu said. Yang Feng reluctantly took out a grenade, leaving only 2 left. He really couldn't bear to throw it away. Brother Lu, I've been looking for you everywhere, so you're here. Then a voice with a Fujian accent sounded. Yang Feng and Li Fu looked at each other at the same time. Zhang Hanlin. The little princess exclaimed in surprise. Zhang Hanlin, are you here? Li Fu arched his hand in surprise and said. Then the scholar, whose face was covered in flowers after being beaten by Yang Feng, changed into an official uniform with patches and bowed back with a swollen face and a blue nose. It was obvious that he was a genuine Zhang Xianzong. Li Shuli, this is my good friend, the Wui friar. Please come to the capital city to introduce to your majesty. He has been practicing in Mount Wui all the year round. He is not familiar with the Ming system. When he came to the capital city early today, he felt strange, so he wore my old clothes and rushed out. Please treat Li Shuli more. Zhang Xianzong said. It can be seen that the civil officials of the Hongwu dynasty were still very weak. If it were for the civil officials of the late Ming dynasty, they would have directly pouted. How dare a petty official stand in front of the editors in the Hanlin Academy? The Hanlin Academy is a compiler. At this age, a compiler is probably the top scorer and a flower scout. During the late Ming dynasty, this is the man who needs to be the first assistant. Not to mention being a minor official, even the general will probably have to bow down when they see him. I see, then the Duke of Hanlin should hurry up and bring your esteemed friend back, otherwise you will have to be verbose if someone encounters you. Li Shuli said. Of course, he shouldn't believe Zhang Xianzong's lies, but giving Han Lin face on such a small matter is not a bad thing for a petty official like him. At most, he suspects Yang Feng as a thief, but it is obviously unreasonable to take a child as a thief. So he can't figure out what Yang Feng is doing now, and it's also impossible to kidnap and sell children. With a Hanlin as a guarantor, he shouldn't be a thief. As for pure clothing violations, it can be quite minor. The key is to save face in Hanlin. Thank you very much, Officer Li. I will treat you to a drink another day. Zhang Xianzong once again arched his hand and said. After speaking, he gave Yang Feng a glance. Yang Feng moved forward calmly. The little princess followed and continued to carry her round-necked shirt, like a lady carrying a skirt. The three of them walked into a small alley like this, and Zhang Xianzong, who was leading the way in front, suddenly turned around and pulled out his sword in a serious manner. Yang Feng rudely snatched it from him. The 14th Empress, please return to the palace. I will fight to stop this thief. Zhang Xianzong put on a fearless and loyal look, looking at the little princess behind Yang Feng without any embarrassment. Yang Feng reached out and picked up the ladder directly. Hurry up and take her away, I don't want to see her again for a whole day. He said. The little princess hugged his arm without hesitation. Yang Feng, you promised to take me to Liaodong, you can't just talk nonsense. She shouted anxiously. Zhang Hanlin, quickly pull her away. Yang Feng shouted to Zhang Xianzong. The little princess simply extended her legs and wrapped them around his right leg, like a tree-climbing monkey hanging from him. Zhang Xianzong looked awkwardly, his posture clearly exceeding his understanding. Well, let's find a secluded place. Empress Dowager 14, please don't worry. Liaodong is thousands of miles away and the journey is difficult. Even if Empress Dowager 14 insists on seeking the Liao King, she still needs to inform your majesty. Please arrange for guards. There is no reason for her to leave the palace without permission. This person's behavior is strange and close to a demon. Empress Dowager 14 should not be tempted by her. Last night, I wished I could not save Empress Dowager 14. Today, even if I die, I will protect her. He said. Yang Feng silently took off the little princess from her body. The latter looked at him with a vigilant gaze and then quickly withdrew to grab his clothes. Zhang Hanlin, I just escaped without permission. You can go back and report to my dad, but with my dad's temper, if I catch him back, I will definitely be beaten to death. I just want to go to Liaodong to find my older brother, and I don't think my dad will let too many people know about this. After all, because he doesn't have a good face, if you report to him, you may make him angry. But if you are willing to help me go to Liaodong, I will definitely thank you in the future. As for Yang Feng, I know better than you who he is enough to protect me from going north. The little princess said to Zhang Xianzong. Empress Dowager 14, how can this be feasible? Your Majesty has always favored Empress Dowager 14. If Empress Dowager 14 goes missing, wouldn't it worry your Majesty? Zhang Xianzong quickly said. This has always been a bit exaggerated, and in Lao Zhu's eyes, his daughter is probably just a gift, and his son is the one he truly dotes on. Yang Feng stood there bored, like a crowd eating melons. Thank you to book enthusiasts Wei Xiaoxiao, Jiang Junchen, Song of Fury, Hongwu and Daxia, Loindoit, Shen Xiuhao, and others for their rewards. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Accompanying you like a tiger, running with me on the road. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Accompanying you like a tiger, running with me on the road. Hanlin Academy. Yang, Hero Yang. In the 24th year of the Hongwu reign of the Ming dynasty, Zhang Xianzong, the editor of the Hanlin Academy, accompanied a smiling face and bowed to Yang Feng. The latter has already taken off his green robe, which is only suitable for the Jurchen people to wear, and there is a system for matching everything. Dressed up like Yang Feng before, going out is like putting a label on my forehead that I'm not a good person. Can the brave warrior persuade the 14th daughter of the emperor to go to Guangning, which is far away from mountains and rivers? Even if the journey goes smoothly, it will take nearly half a year. Moreover, it is now autumn, and it will be a cold winter to reach northern Jili. As for Guangning, it is far away in Liaodong, a harsh and cold border area, and every drop of water turns into ice in winter. The eldest daughter of the emperor has been growing up in the deep palace since childhood. How can she withstand that hardship? Moreover, the Liao King has only taken over Guangning this year. According to the Liaodong Metropolitan Bureau's report, even the royal palace has not been built. Zhang Xianzong said. Zhang Hanlin, do you think I'm willing to take her to Liaodong? Yang Feng, who had just had a full meal, crossed his legs with a teacup and leaned back in the chair, speaking like a landlady. Humph. The little princess who was still having breakfast there let out a cold snort. Then, hungry, she continued to eat wonton quickly with royal elegance, and was also hot and inhaled. Zhang Xianzong sat helplessly on the Grand Tutor's chair on the other side of the coffee table. The best way now is for you to coax her aside, and then I'll quickly slip away. After I slip away, you can send her back to the palace. Yang Feng said. You dare. The little princess said angrily. Ha, I don't believe you're not going to the bathroom, not sleeping, not taking a shower. Yang Feng said. The little princess was speechless, clearly stunned by his shamelessness. Yang Zhuangshi, how can this be done? The 14th daughter of the emperor is his beloved daughter, but she has a mission. Even if I have objections, I can only advise. How dare I deceive her? Zhang Xianzong quickly said. Zhang Hanlin, you keep an eye on him for me. If he escapes, I'll ask you for someone. The little princess said with satisfaction. After speaking, she stood up and looked around. Zhang Hanlin, where is the maid? The 14th daughter of the emperor comes from a poor family with a meager salary, but only basic needs. It's not easy to support a servant, how can we still afford to support a maid? Do you want me to continue wearing this outfit? Empress 14, I have already instructed my old servant to purchase new clothes for the two of you. So. The little princess stood there clearly anxious. You just say you want to go to the bathroom, but you have to talk so much. Turn left when you go out, the garden is right above you. Listen outside, it's a public restroom, regardless of gender. If you want it big, you have to bring your own paper. But why don't you, Hanlin, even have your own house and have to live in the Hanlin courtyard? Aren't you all officials, wealthy and luxurious, mansion villas? Yang Feng said impatiently. My salary for the next month is only 7.5 stones, and I still have an elderly mother, wife, and children at home. This salary can only provide for my family's clothing and food. There is a lot of daily needs in the capital, and if I rent a house outside, there will be very little left. There is an official residence in the Hanlin Academy. Although it may be inconvenient, the advantage is that there is no need to spend money. Zhang Xianzong quickly said. As they spoke, the little princess had already quietly left. Yang Feng quickly got up, but was stopped by Zhang Xianzong. Zhang Hanlin, isn't it okay for us to let each other go? She's just a little girl, you don't have to be afraid of her. When she comes back, you can send her back directly. If her father likes to play games, he will play games, and if he likes to play games, he will play games. Maybe in the future, she won't have a chance to retaliate against you when she gets married. Yang Feng said sincerely. Yang, do you think I can still be so calm and indifferent? I don't know who you are, nor how you managed to escape from the palace with the 14th Empress. However, both sides are palace secrets, and it's already difficult for me to handle them from being involved. Your Majesty has already blocked the news. To the public, it is only said that there are thieves who want to break the ban. Even if I send the 14th Empress back, I will tell Your Majesty that I know that the 14th Empress has eloped out of the palace. This kind of thing will not be good for Your Majesty's face. Your Majesty comes from a humble background and is very strict with the virtues of the princes. How do you think Your Majesty should handle this matter? Zhang Xianzong said. So not only can't you send her back, but you also have to help us leave the capital, so that the emperor won't know that you know his daughter is eloping with someone, and then find a chance to kill you and silence her. Yang Feng sat down with a smile. Wrong, I have to escape with you. Zhang Xianzong smiled and said. Yang Feng looked at him in confusion. The capital is covered with the Jini Wei. Zhang Xianzong said slowly. Are you too careful, too? Accompanying you is like accompanying a tiger. But if you run away, you won't be afraid of the emperor killing your whole family. How did I ever escape? Even though you were holding on to the 14th daughter of the emperor, I was a scholar and powerless to rescue her from your hands. I had to follow you and fight to the death to protect her. As a loyal minister like me, your majesty would not have the right to kill my entire family. If your majesty killed my entire family, wouldn't it be known to the world? Zhang Xianzong smiled and said. You're very cunning. Yang Feng said clearly. However, with Lao Zhu's temper, this is not an exaggeration. Yang Zhuangshi. Zhang Xianzong looked at his attire and hesitated to speak. Don't ask about my affairs, and don't ask about your 14th empress. At most, this matter will put you in a bit of danger. My affairs will really kill your whole family, and it's unlikely that the 9 clans will be able to survive. Yang Feng drank tea and said. At this moment, the little princess returned, and both of them quickly shut up. The old servant who went out to buy clothes also came back with clothes. Zhang Xianzong quickly expressed his loyalty and said that since the 14th empress insisted on going to Liaodong, this was also a deep affection between the 14th empress and the brother and sister of the Liao king, and he couldn't stop them anymore. But he was really not at ease, so in order to protect the 14th daughter of the emperor, he would rather not serve as an official and escort the 14th daughter of the emperor, showing loyalty and bravery, which moved the little princess to tears. Since that's the case, it's not too late. Everyone hurry out of the city. Yang Feng packed all his equipment, but he still wore a bulletproof vest. He wore a short brown shirt on the outside, changed into a pair of pants underneath, and wore a square hat on his head. This is only allowed for farmers to wear. The clothing system of Emperor Hongwu of the Ming dynasty was clear, and anyone had to dress up according to their needs. From clothing style and color to hem length, there are rules, especially in terms of decoration. Wearing a square hat can completely cover up Yang Feng's hair. Those who don't have a bun these days are probably just monks, but monks have bald heads rather than an inch-long head. So dressing up is also learning. Leather boots also have to be put away, and it is shocking for farmers to wear leather boots. The little princess changed into a formal little schoolboy costume, and Zhang Xianzong put on a green robe, took his old servant, tidied up her things, and then left the Hanlin Academy as quickly as possible. At this time, the outside world was still under investigation, but they were not under any suspicion. Even if the capital was covered in the royal guards, Zhu Yuanzhang would definitely know that Zhang Xianzong had taken Yang Feng and his daughter away. However, this will eventually take some time, as long as he knows before he does. Riding a donkey, Zhang Hanlin, along with his old servant, a book boy, and a farmer who worked as a porter carrying miscellaneous items, went out of the city to explore the nearby mountains and waters. There is really no doubt about this. Yang Feng, carrying a backpack disguised as a package, curiously walked through the late 14th century capital of the Ming dynasty. There are constant pedestrians on the street. It's very peaceful. It can be seen that they all live and work in peace and contentment. Moreover, the pedestrians on the road are clearly not as numb and dull as in the sunset photos. It can be said that they all look normal, mainly because there are no people wearing tattered rags, leaning on crutches, or holding broken bowls to beg for food, which greatly affects the art style. Indeed, it is under the feet of the emperor, without even beggars. He said. Zhang Xianzong smiled slightly, probably realizing that the words didn't taste right. When my father is the emperor, how can there still be beggars? Those who are widowed, lonely, disabled, and have no family to rely on are all managed by a nursing home, with 6 stones of rice given at the age. They have a house to live in, food to eat, and clothing to wear. If they have hands and feet but no land, then there are countless wastelands in the north. The court provides oxen, seeds, carts, and food for you to cultivate. If you still beg, then it is obvious that you are a troublemaker. If you capture the army and go there, if you don't want to cultivate the land, you have to cultivate it. The little princess said. Okay, it's quite reasonable, but Zhang Xianzong's smile is clearly problematic. Just thinking about this kind of thing, it all depends on the character of local officials. Of course, it is well executed in the capital and surrounding areas, but even thousands of miles away, do we still expect local officials to provide elderly care for these useless people? During the reign of Zhu Yuanzhang, officials were all nervous and hesitant to slack off. After all, he really peeled the skin and grass, but without the strong pressure of an emperor like him, when it came to other emperors, of course, no one would do it. 6 stones of rice and more than 500 pounds a year, the officials themselves were greedy for ink. Yang Feng looked around, and the still new towering city walls stood tall in the morning light. City towers looked like towering giants overlooking the guarded sentient beings. This is currently the strongest city wall in the world. It is made by bonding hundreds of millions of green bricks. At least in this era, there are really no weapons that can destroy it, and even in 200 years, there are probably no cannons that can threaten it. As for the urban cannon, I'm afraid it won't work either. That thing was fired with granite shells, stone shells, and the strength of the shells would not be much stronger than these city bricks. Even if it could collapse some of the green bricks, it would definitely have shattered itself. This city wall is not made of rammed earth-wrapped bricks, but purely made of green bricks. However, due to cost considerations, the adhesive for the inner and outer layers is different. Unless you keep bombarding an area with this kind of shell, and slowly gnaw it open over time, but with the firing rate and pitiful lifespan of the urban cannon, you don't have to wait for it to gnaw open Nanjing City. You'll have already blown it out. I hope that the urban cannon can bombard Nanjing City and tire out the attackers themselves. However, in the next few hundred years, this city never truly stopped intruders. It also caused the entire city to be slaughtered twice. What are you thinking? The little princess asked curiously. I was wondering if such a sturdy city wall could stop escape and surrender. Yang Feng said. Zhang Hanlin, where are you going? A voice suddenly sounded ahead. The little princess's face changed dramatically, instinctively hiding behind Yang Feng. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Not letting go of children and not being able to hoop wolves. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Not letting go of children and not being able to hoop wolves. At the moment of hearing this sound, the little princess immediately changed her face and instinctively hid behind Yang Feng. Yang Feng gave her a puzzled look. The little princess shrunk directly behind his big bag. Yang Fengzhuan turned his head and looked at more than 10 riders approaching from the opposite side. The first one was 2 teenagers, both dressed in burlap morning clothes and talking at the age of 14 or 15, who looked quite festive. The other one should be his younger brother, but he was taller than him. He stared at this side, probably targeting the little princess. I have seen 2 grandsons. Zhang Xianzong quickly got off his little donkey and took a step forward to bow and salute. The joyful one quickly dismounted and then took the same step forward to salute him, clearly showing respect for the virtuous and virtuous. However, his younger brother urged the horse to come. Come out. He shouted. Yang Feng casually brought the little princess over. Does Huang Sun mean she? He smiled and said in the fierce gaze of the little princess. 14 aunties. Joyful also looked over and immediately said with a surprised expression on his face. Emperor's son also noticed how much he resembled the 14th daughter of the emperor. I just discovered it by chance not long ago. Yesterday, I even mentioned it as a joke to the 14th daughter of the emperor. The 14th daughter of the emperor even said that she would take it to see her one day, but it was just a rural child, afraid that it would tarnish the 14th daughter's eyesight. Zhang Xianzong quickly said. Looking at him with a joyful frown, what's it like? It's like, Sister 14th, you've smeared some dust on your face. Do you think I don't recognize you? Uncle hasn't been buried yet, and during filial piety, you dare to sneak out of the palace without wearing filial piety clothes. If you see me not going to accuse you at Grandpa Huang's place, please ask Grandpa Huang to beat you up. The younger brother said proudly. That schadenfreude is beyond words. Huang-san, you have truly admitted your mistake. Zhang Xianzong quickly said. His face also changed a bit at this moment. The little princess has indeed not washed off the oil paint on her face. Her pampered white face cannot be hidden even when she wears the clothes of a book boy. The dark oil paint painted by Yang Feng at least makes her look darker, including on her hands and neck, making her look more like an ordinary person. But this is just for passers-by, making it difficult to detect abnormalities at a glance. But the two in front of her are her nephews, and they are both about the same age. It's probably not uncommon to see each other on weekdays, so it's really hard to hide from them. The guards following the imperial grandchildren quietly moved forward, while the younger brother dismounted and went to pull the little princess, while his brother silently watched Zhang Xianzong. This kid is very cunning. Yang Feng quietly took out a hand grenade. Second brother, you apologize. Brother suddenly said. My younger brother turned his head in shock. This is clearly. He said. It's not very clear, you're mistaken. Zhang Hanlin, Gao Qi has been studying recently and is quite puzzled. Please come to the mansion to teach him. Brother said. Okay, this is actually Zhu Gaoji. The remaining one is Zhu Gaoshi. They are giving filial piety to their uncle, the Crown Prince Zhu Biao. Their father certainly cannot come, but their brothers can. And listening to this, the little princess also has to give her brother, who is more than 40% of the family affection, filial piety. Zhu Gaoshi's cunning mind, which was clearly not as cunning as his brother's, should still be incomprehensible. He looked at the little princess of his 14th aunt, but in the end, he had to listen to his brother's advice, so he got back on his horse with confusion. However, his brother looked at Zhang Xianzong, who, although he didn't want to go, knew he couldn't refuse anymore. He finally gave Yang Feng a wink and then got back on the little donkey, while the guards looked at Yang Feng. The little princess also grabbed his arm and looked at him with fierce eyes. After some thought, Yang Feng calmly followed along. After all, this is a street, and it's in a city with hundreds of thousands of veteran soldiers who have been through countless battles. Maybe any street sweeper on the roadside would have chopped off more than 10 heads 20 years ago. The little princess nodded in satisfaction, as if being served comfortably by an old Buddha. Her two nephews were looking at her on horseback, still so gloating. She took out Yang Feng's flashlight, walked over to her nephew, and then hooked his hand. Poor Zhu Gaoshi lowered his head in confusion. His aunt didn't hesitate to point the flashlight at his eyes, and then pressed the strobe button according to Yang Feng's instructions. Her nephew let out a scream. Amidst the screams of the guards around her, her eldest nephew looked at her in astonishment. What are you looking at? She shouted with the dignity of an elder. Her eldest nephew quickly signaled to the guards not to be rude, and at the same time asked one of the guards to send a horse to his aunt, while Zhu Gaoshi covered his eyes and howled as if he was blind on the horse's back. Yang Feng looked at the little princess with approving eyes. Of course, even at night, this thing can only temporarily blind people, and its power drops sharply during the day. Therefore, Zhu Gaoshi quickly returned to normal. Although he had to constantly shed tears and rub his eyes, he already knew that he had not been photographed blind. He occasionally looked at his aunt with fearful eyes on his horse's back. This kind of thing was clearly beyond his understanding and could be classified as a magical tool. Their group moved forward like this, all the way to a large mansion. Where is this? Yang Feng looked at the Zhongshan prince's mansion on the gate with confusion. This is the residence of Prince Wenning of Zhongshan. The Queen of Yan is the daughter of Prince Wenning of Zhongshan. This is the home of two imperial grandsons' uncles. Zhang Xianzong said. Isn't there the Yan prince's mansion here? Yang Feng asked. The king of Yan was a vassal king, and his residence was in Beiping. The vassal king was not allowed to leave the fiefdom without authorization, let alone enter the capital. Therefore, the king of Yen did not have a mansion in Nanjing. If the king of Yen came to the capital to meet, he would reside in the Ten Wang's mansion. As for the two imperial grandsons who entered the capital, they would be at their uncle's house. Zhang Xianzong said. Just as they were speaking, the guards had quietly completed their encirclement. Take it down. Zhu Gaoqi shouted. In fact, Yang Feng, who had been holding his hands in his arms all along, simply pulled the trigger, bang. In the sudden sound of gunfire, a bullet hit the leg of the nearest guard's horse. The unlucky warhorse let out a mournful cry and knelt down. The guard on the horse's back reacted quickly and drew his sword before landing, but at the same time, a second gunshot rang out. A bullet hit his thigh, and he screamed and knelt down to the ground. The other guards drew their swords in shock, while Yang Feng smiled and pulled out his gun among them. Then, amidst a stunned gaze, he leisurely opened the folding stock of his gun and aimed the muzzle at Zhu Gaoqi. After folding the stock of the gun, this thing is only half a meter long in total and can be hidden inside his wide short brown shirt. Huang Sun, I don't think it's necessary anymore, right? He said. Don't move around, he has a firearm in his hand that can kill people. The little princess exclaimed, pretending to be a tiger. Then she kicked the guard who was leading the horse, who silently knelt beside the horse. She carefully dismounted and stepped on his back to the ground. Come here. She waved at Zhu Gaoqi. The latter looked at Yang Feng, and Yang Feng's gun immediately turned to his younger brother. Zhu Gaoqi dismounted and followed his aunt towards the inside. Zhang Xianzong quickly dismounted from the donkey and also wanted to follow in. The guards next to him immediately stopped him. Zhu Gaoqi turned to look at him, and Zhang Xianzong looked at Zhu Gaoqi with obvious longing. The latter waved to him, and the guards retreated. He quickly chased the two into the side door of the royal mansion. The guards watched Yang Feng vigilantly, and the injured guards on the ground tore their clothes and looked at the wound on their thighs through the wound and without hitting the bone, quickly go get salt water and strong liquor to wash repeatedly. It's best to dip a cloth strip that has been boiled in boiling water into strong liquor and salt water, poke it in, and brush repeatedly. It should get better soon, Yang Feng said very seriously. Then he imagined the feeling in his heart. I shudder with fear. A few minutes later, the little princess walked out of it with a proud expression on her face. Come on in, it's still Zhang Hanlin who can speak fluently. They will take us out of the city. She said. Is Zhang Hanlin persuading your eldest nephew to change his mind in front of you, or will he separate you and persuade him to change his mind? Yang Feng asked with a deep smile. He took Gao Qi aside to persuade him alone. The little princess said without realizing it. Yang Feng smiled and nodded. He felt that Zhang Hanlin was a bit strange. Although the reason seemed normal, they always made him feel that something was wrong. It seemed that he was not very surprised by his actions, even as a Hanlin, he could remain calm. However, looking at his messy equipment and way of speaking, especially this one, his way of speaking, such as using words, was ultimately different from this era. However, Zhang Xianzong remained calm towards these things, just like I already knew some things about him, at least partially. Now I can basically understand that this guy is an insider. If that's the case, then their smooth exit from the palace was also intentionally arranged by Zhu Yuanzhang. At that time, he felt that the exit was too smooth. This was intentionally letting him out. It's about letting him come out. Zhu Yuanzhang wanted to investigate his identity and see if there was anyone behind him, whether it was really from 600 years later, as he himself said. So deliberately letting him leave the palace and then intentionally asking Zhang Xianzong to help him, just to see where he is going next, whether there are any accomplices outside, and as for letting the little princess follow him, what do you think I'm doing? The little princess looked at Yang Feng's gaze lingering on her face and said displeased. What kind of bait do you use for fishing? Yang Feng asked a guard. Chu eel. The latter said coldly and coolly. I'm looking at a really big eel. Yang Feng said seriously to the little princess. Of course, it cannot be considered as a curved eel, more precisely, it is a light bulb and a burden. After all, it is easy for him to hide and escape alone, but with such a burden, he cannot hide or run away. It must be said that His Majesty the Emperor is indeed like a true emperor, and he really cannot bear to let go of children and wolves. His daughter can even be used as a tool to catch him, a wolf. Humph. Chu-yi snorted and continued happily turning towards the inside. Yang Feng carried his rifle and, surrounded by guards, also followed into the Zhongshan prince's mansion. Thank you to book friends Shen Yuan Chen Hang, and Guming Ji, Axi, book friends 202010171959872560137033, Pure Hihi, Jin and Mingyue, book friends 202110141136247226, and others for their tips. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The strange situation witnessed in the 25th year of Hongwu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The strange situation witnessed in the 25th year of Hongwu, the backyard of Zhongshan Prince's mansion. Zhu Gaoqi, who looked very festive, glanced at Yang Feng and then turned his gaze to his aunt. 14 aunties, as elders of Gaoqi, left the palace without permission. Although it is not right for us, the younger generation, to be more talkative, Gaoqi will inevitably report this matter. Please stay here temporarily, Aunt 14. He put on a youthful and mature appearance and said. You. His aunt's face changed and she immediately grabbed him. The 14th daughter of the emperor, this is the duty of the emperor's grandson. You are waiting here for His Majesty's will for the time being. Zhang Xianzong quickly stopped her and signaled to Yang Feng at the same time. Yang Feng seemed to have missed it and was admiring Su Da's garden there. However, Su Da had been dead for many years by this time. It was his son Su Huizu, Duke of the State of Wei, who really lived here. The palace was very large, but it could not be said how luxurious it was. At least it was much more simple than those royal residences that had been preserved in modern times, mainly because the carved beams and painted rafters was much inferior. Yang Zhuangshi. Zhang Xianzong quickly said. Ah, wait here. Yang Feng was very perfunctory in persuading, and then successfully attracted firepower. Zhu Gaoqi took advantage of his aunt's furious target and turned to Yang Feng. He quickly broke free and walked outward, followed by the guards also leaving. In the blink of an eye, there were only the three of them left here. Let's go. Yang Feng picked up his big bag and walked out under the bewildered gaze of the little princess. Empress Dowager 14, Emperor's son has already arranged it. Let's go out by the back door, and there are people waiting outside. After leaving the city, they will escort us north. Emperor's son is also filial to Empress Dowager 14, after all, if you return to the palace, you will inevitably be punished. But Emperor's son dare not deceive His Majesty, so this arrangement can only be made. Let's go north first, hide at the King of Liao for a few days, and when His Majesty's anger subsides, you will eventually spoil Empress Dowager 14. At that time, you can naturally be ordered to return to the palace. Zhang Xianzong quickly explained to the little princess. Humph. The little princess snorted contentedly. Then she followed Yang Feng out, and Zhang Xianzong clearly came here. He gave them directions from behind, and the three of them walked into the deep garden like this. Why aren't there many people here? At least it's also the royal mansion. Shouldn't there be a group of servants? Yang Feng looked at the garden without even a single person and said. Yang Zhuangshi laughed. According to His Majesty's system, the number of slaves in the three princes' family could not exceed 20, unless there was an additional imperial gift. The Duke of Wei was a first-class commander, and there were only 12 slaves. Even though there were still some hired servants and maids in the mansion, they were not in groups. There were also 120 imperial gifts of personal soldiers, all of whom belonged to the military households. Now, they are all training with the Duke of Wei in Shaanxi. Zhang Xianzong said. So the Duke of Tang only had 12 domestic slaves. Yang Feng exclaimed in shock. Zhang Xianzong nodded. No, he's the second generation. His father didn't leave any behind. Yang Feng asked. The slaves of King Wenning of Zhongshan were his own slaves, not the slaves of the Duke of Wei. After the death of King Wenning of Zhongshan, he was required to submit his name and register, which would be returned to the people by the court. Zhang Xianzong said. So this slave cannot inherit yet. Yang Feng said unexpectedly. As he spoke, his fingers in his arms pulled the trigger, bang. The sound of gunfire suddenly rang out. The bullet hit the stone slab under Zhang Xianzong's feet, and Zhang Hanlin let out a scream as the debris splattered. In the next moment, all the people hiding around rushed out, some holding crossbows, some holding hooks and sickles, and some holding fishing nets. One by one, they maintained a somewhat awkward assault posture and looked at them. Behind these people were Zhu Gaoxi holding a big stick, and a man in his 20s wearing armor with a knife in his hand. I'll just say, the Grand Royal Mansion can't just be so desolate. Yang Feng smiled and said. Take down this demon. Zhu Gaoxi waved his big stick and shouted. Su Yingxiu, dare you be rude? The little princess exclaimed angrily. The armored person paused for a moment, looking at her in confusion. Empress 14. He said with trembling lips. Second uncle, this demon is holding 14 aunties hostage. Let's just take him. Zhu Gaoxi shouted. Su Gongzi, don't you feel curious? What happened in the palace last night? Why did the 14th daughter of the emperor suddenly appear here, and why did the emperor block the news? You are also an adult, and this kind of child doesn't understand. Do you also don't understand? The emperor's blocking of the news has been discovered by you. I think if I had such a nephew, I really wish I could turn around and slap him. I have seen the son of King Father, and today I have seen the nephew of King Uncle again. Yang Feng smiled happily and said. Su Yingxiu's face was covered in cold sweat as he stood there holding a knife, as if he had been foolish. Zhang Xianzong, who originally had a face full of tears, suddenly calmed down and gestured to the little princess. Then he walked towards the knives and guns with a resolute expression on his face. Yang Feng followed calmly. Although the little princess was quite confused, she quickly grabbed his clothes and they walked straight into the encirclement. The servants of the Su family looked at Su Yingxiu, who stood there motionless, trembling with his knife in his hand. Zhu Gaoxi was still urging, but this was the Su family. If Su Yingxiu didn't give orders, the servants wouldn't move. Yang Feng and the others walked up to Su Yingxiu in this way. Yang Feng suddenly stopped, and then he reached out and poked Su Yingxiu's arm. The latter's knife landed instantly. Ha! Yang Feng smiled. Then he walked away with a smile on his face. Why didn't he turn around and slap Zhu Gaoxi in the face? At the back door, Yang Feng asked Zhang Xianzong. Although Commander Su is the second son of King Wenning of Zhongshan, he is a commoner. Zhang Xianzong quickly answered. Ah, I don't have much status in the Su family, no wonder I'm so easily coaxed by Zhu Gaoxi. Yang Feng said. Then they left the Su family. Outside were Zhang Xianzong's old servants and donkeys, but there were also 6 guards who had previously followed Zhu Gaoxi, all of whom had changed their clothes and had not ridden horses. Therefore, the ambush on Yang Feng was not ordered by Zhu Gaoxi, but by Zhu Gaoxi, who had well-developed limbs and a simple mind. As for Su Yingxiu, he was simply tricked by Zhu Gaoxi. He didn't know the truth, but as an illegitimate son, he needed to show his enthusiasm in front of a legitimate nephew like Zhu Gaoxi. However, he didn't expect to get involved in the palace intrigue and was suddenly dumbfounded. Zhang Xianzong immediately got on a horse, but the little princess got on his little donkey. She is still a bookworm. It is obvious that the owner is riding a donkey and she is riding a horse incorrectly, but it is reasonable for the owner to ride a donkey as a book boy. A Hanlin with a book boy, an old servant, 6 guards, and a porter, this reasonable combination headed straight to the Jubao Gate. Next to the Zhongshan prince's mansion is the main street that leads directly to this city gate. After turning to the street, Yang Feng immediately saw the towering castle at the end. I fired a gun before, why doesn't anyone seem to care? Yang Feng looked at the Jubao Gate tower in the distance, and then at the peaceful atmosphere around him, asking somewhat strangely. The next moment, boom. There was an explosion coming from far behind him. Pedestrians on the street, accustomed to turning their heads northeast, looked at the rising black smoke, and then continued to do whatever they wanted. The Gunpowder Bureau is located north of Huiqing Bridge, and it is not uncommon for accidental explosions to occur during daily trial production of gunpowder. Military camps are also scattered throughout the city, and training in firing firearms is almost daily. Zhang Xianzong smiled and said. So Yang Feng fired those few shots, and nobody really cares in this city. Then the little princess riding a donkey came out from Shufu Street behind, and then let out a joyful shout, running like Era who was preparing to demolish their house, towards a cluster of flowers in front of them. This street was clearly a flower market, with not only shops on both sides making various fake flowers, but also those carrying a burden selling flowers on the street, and some shops even displaying potted flowers. The whole street is covered. Yang Feng is not interested in taking care of her, anyway she doesn't have any money. He looked curiously at the street, where a strange combination was walking by. 2 young people were wearing green headscarves on their heads, green belts tied around their waists, and leather boots on their feet, leather boots with fur. And it's clearly some of the most common animal skins. So it looks like 2 hooves have grown. But they carried a flat wooden board on their shoulders, with a sickly old man lying on it, and 2 similarly dressed men supporting them to prevent him from falling off. After all, it was just a piece of wood slightly wider than a pole, and sitting on it clearly required some skill. However, it can be seen that none of these 5 people are Han Chinese, so they should be considered as Simu people. At this time, it was the early Ming dynasty and the Yuan dynasty, and there should still be a large number of Simu people remaining. In fact, there were many shops on both sides. Didn't you say that commoners are not allowed to wear boots, and even in winter, they can only wear leather bandages around their ankles? This is clearly not for official positions, is it? Yang Feng said. I am only allowed to wear this kind of leather boots with fur on them, as it is a lowly name. Zhang Xianzong said. What about this wood? Bianzhang, they are old and sick and cannot walk. They can only ride bianzhang when going out, not horses, donkeys, or cars. It's too strict to treat others like this. Yang Feng sighed with emotion. Just as they were speaking, a group of obviously bored people walked towards those lecherous eyes. They deliberately walked towards the side of the wall with happy smiles one by one, and those lecherous eyes quickly stopped and stood there looking at them with pleasing smiles, bowing and bowing. These people walked proudly, but in the past moment, one of them suddenly pushed his companion, who exaggerated and collided with the flat staff. The colored eyes carrying the flat staff were frightened and quickly avoided, but instinctively walked towards the middle of the road. The old man on top was so scared that he immediately became alert and shouted to them not to go in the middle, but in the end, he was still forced into the middle of the road. The group of idle people immediately stopped and rolled up their sleeves one by one, rushing over. Is this bullying someone? Yang Feng said. Poor eyes fell on the road and were beaten along with those who carried him. Indeed, it is a form of bullying, but your Majesty's system prohibits people from walking due to their lowly appearance, and those who dare to walk will not be considered dead by others. Therefore, bullying is also in accordance with the law. But I am a country of great etiquette, so. Zhang Xianzong sighed and then looked at Yang Feng's expectant gaze. Of course, your majesty is also responsible for the distinction between the Chinese and the barbarians, the distinction between high and low. As a country of etiquette in the Ming dynasty, it is legitimate to educate the world with etiquette. The distinction between the Chinese and barbarians, the distinction between high and low, is all about etiquette. He said solemnly. Thank you to your book friend Yaohua 0527, Ahima, a white crow. I am your neighbor Wang, a fisherman and woodcutter, backup 59, Xinlua's Fish 123, Beichen Delta, OUCP 12138, Scott Fatty, Xingyang 01, Jinan Mingyue, Hongwu Daxiao, 321111111, and others for their rewards. End of this chapter.